February 8th, 1973, 11:47 p.m. Nicky Barnes sat in his Citroen Maserati on the corner of 116th and Lenox Avenue, staring at a gym bag in his passenger seat. Inside that bag was $2 million in cash. 7 days of work. 7 days of moving product faster than he'd ever moved it before. 7 days of taking risks that would have gotten most men killed. And now, at 11:47 p.m. on a freezing Thursday night, he was about to hand every single dollar to Matty Madonna. Not because he owed it, not because he'd been caught short, but because Matty Madonna had called him 6 hours ago and said 4 words that changed everything. "I want it all." Now, you might be thinking this is a story about betrayal, about the Italian mob squeezing a black dealer out of Harlem, about Nicky Barnes getting robbed by the same people who were supposed to be his partners. But you'd be wrong, because what happened that night, what Matty Madonna did, and more importantly, what Nicky Barnes learned, became the foundation for an empire that would dominate Harlem for the next 4 years. This is the story of the week Nicky Barnes made more money than he'd ever made in his life, and the night he had to give it all away to keep breathing. But more than that, it's the story of how the Italian mafia taught Nicky Barnes the one lesson that would make him untouchable. In this business, it's not about how much money you make, it's about who owns you when you make it. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear reveals the real power structure of Harlem's drug trade in the 1970s. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why Nicky Barnes became Mr. Untouchable, while dozens of other dealers ended up dead or in prison. Let's rewind 7 days. February 1st, 1973, 6:15 a.m. Nicky Barnes stood in his stash apartment on West 147th Street, looking at 30 kilograms of pure heroin stacked on his kitchen table. 30 keys. At 1973 street prices, properly cut and distributed, that was potentially $3 million in revenue. After paying his people, after covering expenses, after the Italians cut, he was looking at maybe $600,000 to $800,000 profit. That was a normal month's work. But this wasn't a normal month. 3 things had happened in the past 2 weeks that created what Nicky would later call the perfect storm. First, Frank Lucchese had just been arrested. Frank Lucchese, the other major black dealer in Harlem, the man who'd been Nicky's biggest competition for 3 years, was sitting in federal custody, facing charges that would put him away for decades. That meant half of Harlem's regular customers suddenly had nowhere to go, and they were desperate. Second, the NYPD had just reassigned half the narcotics officers in Harlem to Brooklyn. Some gang war in Bed-Stuy had pulled resources away from Manhattan. For maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3, Nicky had room to operate more openly than he'd been able to in years. Third, the weather. It was cold, brutally, impossibly cold. The kind of cold that made addicts desperate, made them willing to pay premium prices just to stay high enough to forget they were freezing. Nicky looked at those 30 kilos and made a decision. Instead of stretching them over 4 weeks like he normally would, he was going to move them in 7 days. He called his 7 lieutenants, the men who would eventually form the council, and gave them instructions. Double shifts, every corner, every apartment. I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if the cops are circling. We're moving product 24/7 until this is gone. Joseph Jazz Hayden looked at him like he was crazy. "Nicky, that's asking for heat. The more visible we are, the more—" "Frank Lucchese is gone," Nicky interrupted. "You know how many fiends are walking around right now with money in their pockets and nowhere to spend it? This is our chance to own the whole neighborhood, but we've only got a window, maybe 2 weeks before the cops come back heavy, maybe less." He paused. Let that sink in. "So we move now.
We move hard, and we make enough money that when the heat comes back, we can afford to lay low for a month." Guy Fisher, the youngest of the lieutenants, smiled. "How much we talkin'?" "If we do this right, 2 million, maybe more." The room went quiet. $2 million in 1 week was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of ambition that got people killed. But it was also possible. And that possibility hung in the air like electricity.
Day 1, February 1st. They moved 4 kilos. Nicky had his people cutting and packaging around the clock. They weren't being as careful as usual about quality control. The goal was volume, not perfection, but the product was still better than anything else on the street. By midnight, they'd cleared $280,000. Day 2, February 2nd. Word spread fast. Addicts who normally bought from Frank Lucches's people were lining up at Nicky's spots. Some of them had been waiting for days, desperate, willing to pay whatever price Nicky set. He moved 5 kilos. Revenue, $350,000. Day 3, February 3rd. This was when things started getting dangerous. The cops noticed. How could they not? Every corner in Harlem suddenly had lines of people waiting. Every apartment building had suspicious traffic. But with half the narcotics unit in Brooklyn, there wasn't much they could do except watch. And watching wasn't enough to stop what was happening. Nicky moved 6 kilos. Revenue, $420,000. Day 4, February 4th. This was the day Nicky should have slowed down. He'd moved 15 kilos in 3 days. He was on pace to hit his goal with days to spare. The smart move would have been to ease off, let things cool down, avoid drawing more attention. But Nicky had tasted something he'd never tasted before: total dominance. For these 4 days, he wasn't just a major player in Harlem. He was the player, the only game in town. And the money was flowing so fast he could barely count it. So instead of slowing down, he pushed harder. He moved 7 kilos. Revenue, $490,000. By the end of day 4, Nicky Barnes had made $1.54 million in gross revenue. After paying his people and covering expenses, he was sitting on about $1.1 million in profit, and he still had 8 kilos left. That's when his phone rang.
Nicky closed his eyes. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, hot and bitter. "This isn't fair, Matty." "Fair?" Matty laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. "Nicholas, you're 20 years younger than me. You've been in this business for what, 10 years? I've been doing this since before you were born, and you want to talk to me about fair?" He let that settle. "Here's what's fair. I gave you opportunity. I gave you product when nobody else would. I taught you how to operate. And now when things are getting dangerous, I'm protecting both of us by calling time out. You bring me the money tomorrow night, all of it. We take a break for 2 weeks, let things cool down, then we start fresh." "And if I say no?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 5 seconds. When Matty spoke again, his voice was ice. "Then you're not as smart as I thought you were, and I'll have to reconsider our arrangement, permanently." The line went dead. Nicky stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. Guy Fisher broke the silence. What did he say? Nicky lowered the phone slowly. "He wants everything, tomorrow night." "Everything? We've still got 8 kilos to move. We're 3 days away from—" "I know," Nicky said quietly. Jazz leaned forward. "So what are we going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was Nicky Barnes going to do? February 5th, 1973, 2:34 a.m. Nicky couldn't sleep. He sat in his living room, alone, with $2 million in cash spread across his coffee table. Technically, it was closer to $1.8 million. He'd paid his people, covered expenses, set aside money for bribes and protection. But still, nearly $2 million. More money than he'd ever had at one time. More money than his father had made in his entire life. More money than seemed possible a week ago. And Matty Madonna wanted all of it. Nicky had three options. Option 1. Give Matty the money. Do exactly what he'd been told. Hand over the cash, take the forced break, restart in 2 weeks when things cooled down. Pros: he'd stay in Matty's good graces. He'd keep his supply line. He'd live. Cons: he'd be giving up nearly $2 million for nothing. All that risk, all that work, all that perfect timing for zero profit. Option 2. Refuse. Tell Matty to go to hell, finish moving the last 8 kilos, make his full number, find a new supplier if necessary. Pros: he'd keep his money. He'd prove he wasn't anyone's puppet. Cons: he'd make an enemy of the Lucchese crime family, and enemies of the Lucchese family didn't last long in New York. Option 3. Negotiate. Meet with Matty, explain his position, offer a compromise, maybe give him half, keep half. Appeal to his business sense. Pros: maybe they could find middle ground. Cons: Matty Madonna didn't sound like a man interested in middle ground. Nicky sat there until the sun came up, running scenarios. And that's when he had a thought that changed everything. What if this wasn't about the money? What if Matty didn't actually want $2 million? He was already rich. The Lucchese family was pulling in tens of millions a year from drugs, gambling, construction rackets. $2 million was significant, but it wasn't life-changing money for them. So what was this really about? And then it hit him. This was a test. Matty Madonna was testing whether Nicky understood who was really in charge, because that was the fundamental truth of this business. The supplier controlled everything. The supplier decided who sold, how much they sold, and when they sold it. A dealer could be smart, ambitious, hard-working, all the things Nicky was, but at the end of the day, he was just a middleman, and middlemen who forgot their place didn't survive. This wasn't about the money. This was about Nicky accepting his role in the hierarchy. And if he accepted it, if he handed over that $2 million without complaint, he'd prove something valuable. He'd prove he could be trusted to stay in his lane. He'd prove he understood the long game. He'd prove he was worth keeping alive. At 7:15 a.m., Nicky made his decision. He called Guy Fisher. "Get the money ready, all of it. We're meeting Matty tonight." "All of it?" Guy sounded shocked. "Nicky, we've been talking, and some of us think maybe we should—" "It's not up for discussion," Nicky said. "We're giving him what he wants." "But why? We earned that money. We took the risks. He's just our supplier. And without a supplier, we're nothing. This isn't about this week's money. This is about next year's money and the year after that." Guy was silent for a moment. "You really think giving him everything is the smart play?" "I think staying alive is the smart play," Nicky replied. "And right now, that means showing Matty Madonna that I know my place, that I respect the order of things." He paused. "But don't worry, I'm learning, I'm watching, and one day, not today, not next year, but one day, I'm going to be in Matty's position. I'm going to be the one with the supply, the one with the power, the one making the calls." "How are you going to do that?" Nicky smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "By being patient, by being smart, by doing exactly what Matty expects tonight, and using what I learn to never be in this position again."
February 5th, 1973, 11:47 p.m. And that brings us back to where we started. Nicky Barnes, sitting in his Citroën Maserati on 116th and Lenox, staring at a gym bag containing $2 million. His phone rang, a payphone number he didn't recognize. "Yeah?" "There's a blue Cadillac parked on West 4th Street, outside the Washington Square Diner."
It was one of Matty's guys, voice flat, professional. "Keys are under the driver's side floor mat. Be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. This was how it always worked. Car exchanges, anonymous, untraceable. Matty's people would leave a car somewhere with drugs in the trunk. Nicky would pick it up, deliver it to his stash house, sell the product, fill the trunk with cash, and return it to a different location. Clean, simple, almost impossible for the cops to track. Except tonight, Nicky was the one filling the trunk with cash before he'd sold anything. He drove downtown in silence, parked his Citroën 3 blocks away, walked to the Washington Square diner with the gym bag over his shoulder. The blue Cadillac was exactly where they'd said it would be. Nicky found the keys, popped the trunk, and stared at the empty space. $2 million, 7 days of work. He threw the bag inside, closed the trunk, and walked away without looking back. 20 minutes later, Nicky's phone rang again. "It's all there?" Matty's voice. "Every dollar." "Good." A pause. "You made the right choice, Nicholas." "Did I?" "You're still breathing, aren't you?" Nicky couldn't argue with that. "I want you to understand something," Matty continued. "This wasn't about taking your money. This was about making sure you understand how this business works. You're talented, you're smart, you've got instincts that most dealers don't have. But talent without discipline gets people killed." "I get it." "Do you? Because I'm not sure you do." Matty's voice softened slightly. "Let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, I was in your position, young, hungry, making more money than I'd ever seen. I got cocky, started thinking I was untouchable, started thinking I could operate without respecting the people above me. What happened? They broke both my legs and left me in a warehouse for 3 days. When they finally came back, they explained very clearly that I had 2 choices: accept my role in the organization or die. And you chose to accept." "I chose to be patient," Matty corrected. "I chose to learn. I chose to wait for my moment. And 20 years later, I'm the one making the calls. I'm the one deciding who lives and who dies." He let that sink in. "You gave me $2 million tonight, Nicholas. You know what that tells me?" "What?" "It tells me you're thinking long-term. It tells me you're willing to take a loss today for a bigger win tomorrow. It tells me you might actually survive this business." "Survive isn't enough." "No," Matty agreed. "Survival is just the first step, but it's a necessary step. You can't win if you're dead." Nicky heard the click of a lighter, the long exhale of cigarette smoke. "Here's what's going to happen," Matty said. "You're going to take 2 weeks off. Let the heat die down. Let the cops forget about the spike in activity. Then you come back and we start fresh. New product, new timeline, same arrangement." "Same arrangement?" Nicky couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice. "How is that fair?" "It's not fair. It's business." Matty's voice hardened. "And if you're going to survive in this business, you need to learn the difference." "Then teach me." "What?" "You said I need to learn, so teach me. Show me how to operate at your level. Show me how to build something that lasts." Matty was quiet for a long moment. "Why should I do that?" "Because eventually you're going to retire or get arrested or die. And when that happens, someone's going to take over your territory, your connections, your suppliers." Nicky's voice was steady, certain. "You can let that person be a random soldier who doesn't know what he's doing, or you can make sure it's someone you trained, someone you trust, someone who understands how the game is played." Another long silence. Then Matty laughed, not the cold, threatening laugh from before. This was genuine amusement. "You've got balls, Nicholas. I'll give you that." "So is that a yes?" "It's a maybe," Matty said. "You take your 2 weeks off. You come back clean. You show me you can be patient, disciplined, smart, and we'll talk about what comes next." "And the 2 million?" "Consider it tuition," Matty replied. "You paid $2 million to learn the most important lesson in this business. Respect the hierarchy, or the hierarchy will destroy you." The line went dead. Nicky stood there on West 4th Street, empty-handed, broke, humiliated, but also alive and educated. February 4th, 1973, 11:23 p.m. Nicky was in his main apartment on Riverside Drive, counting money with Guy Fisher and Jazz Hayden when the phone on his desk rang. He almost didn't answer. It was late, he was exhausted, and he had 8 more kilos to move in the next 3 days. But something made him pick up. "Yeah?" "Nicky." The voice was calm, measured, with that distinctive Italian accent that made every word sound like a threat wrapped in politeness. Matty Madonna. Nicky's spine straightened. He hadn't expected to hear from Matty for another 2 weeks. Their normal schedule was simple. Matty would deliver product once a month, Nicky would sell it, accumulate the cash, and return it via their car exchange system at the end of the cycle. They'd just done an exchange 3 weeks ago. By their arrangement, Nicky had another week before he owed anything. "Matty," Nicky said, keeping his voice neutral. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I hear you've been busy." The words hung in the air. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just an observation. "Business is good," I replied, carefully. "Business is very good," Matty corrected. "I'm hearing numbers that interest me, Nicholas. Big numbers. Numbers that make me think maybe we need to have a conversation about our arrangement." Nicky's jaw tightened. Guy and Jazz had stopped counting and were watching him now, reading his body language. "Our arrangement is clear. I move product, I pay you at the end of the cycle, we both make money." "That's the arrangement when you're moving normal volume," Matty agreed. "But this isn't normal volume, is it? You've moved more product in 4 days than you usually move in 2 weeks. That's my business. I took the risk, I put in the work." "With my product," Matty interrupted. The politeness was gone now. "Let me explain something to you, Nicholas, something you seem to have forgotten in all this excitement." Nicky said nothing, just listened, because when Matty Madonna was explaining something, you listened. "That heroin sitting in your apartments right now, that didn't come from you. It came from me, from my connections in Asia, from my risk, my investment, my resources. You're not a businessman who bought inventory. You're a dealer working on consignment. I know how consignment works. Do you? Because a dealer working on consignment doesn't get to decide how fast or slow to move product. A dealer on consignment moves at the pace his supplier allows, and when he starts moving too fast, starts making too much noise, starts drawing too much heat." Matty paused. "That's when the supplier steps in and reminds him who's really in charge." Nicky's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want, Matty?" "I want you to bring me everything you've made this week. All of it, tomorrow night." "Tomorrow? That's not our schedule. I still have product to move. I still have—" "I don't care about your schedule. I care about my product being on the street at a volume that's going to bring federal attention. Frank Lucas's arrest isn't a gift, Nicholas. It's a warning. The feds are circling, and when they circle, they look for the next big fish. I can handle the heat." "No," Matty said flatly. "You can't, because you're not thinking clearly. You're thinking about $2 million. I'm thinking about the 20-year sentence that comes with it when the feds decide to make an example of someone." "So you want me to just hand over everything I've earned?" "I want you to remember that you're earning it with my product, and when the heat gets too hot, I have the right to protect my investment. That means pulling back. That means taking the money before it becomes evidence." February 6th, 1973, 1:14 a.m. Nicky sat in his apartment with his 7 lieutenants, explaining what had happened. They didn't take it well. $2 million? Guy Fisher looked like he might be sick. You just gave him $2 million? I gave him what he demanded. You gave him everything. Jazz Hayden slammed his fist on the table. We worked 7 days straight. We risked everything. And for what? So some Italian can take our money and laugh at us? He's not laughing, Nicky said quietly. He's teaching. Teaching what? That we're his slaves? No. Nicky stood up, walked to the window, looked out at Harlem's streets. He's teaching me that in this business there are two kinds of people, people who control the supply and people who don't. He turned back to face them. Right now, we're in the second category. We're good at what we do. We're probably the best dealers in Harlem, but we're still dealers. We're still middlemen. We're still dependent on Matty Madonna and the Lucchese family for product. So what are you saying? Guy asked. I'm saying we need to change that. Thomas Gap's foreman leaned forward. You want to cut out the Italians? Nicky, that's suicide. Not cut them out, Nicky corrected. Evolve, build our own connections, our own supply lines, our own system. How? I don't know yet, Nicky admitted, but tonight taught me something important. Matty Madonna has power over us because we need him more than he needs us. There are a dozen dealers in Harlem who could replace us tomorrow. He pointed at each of them. But what if we made ourselves irreplaceable? What if we built an organization so tight, so professional, so efficient that the Italians couldn't afford to cut us off? How do we do that? By doing exactly what I'm learning from Matty. Structure, discipline, professionalism. We're not just dealers anymore, we're businessmen. We create systems, we create hierarchies, we create rules that everyone follows. Nicky walked back to the table. Tonight, I lost $2 million, but I gained something more valuable. I gained Matty Madonna's respect, and more importantly, I gained insight into how power really works in this business. What kind of insight? The kind that's going to make us untouchable. Over the next 2 years, Nicky Barnes built exactly what he'd promised. He took the lessons he'd learned from Matty Madonna, structure, hierarchy, discipline, and applied them to his own organization. He formalized the council, 7 men, each controlling a territory, each following strict rules about conduct, profit sharing, and security. He created layers of protection, runners who didn't know dealers, dealers who didn't know distributors, distributors who didn't know Nicky. He invested in legitimate businesses to launder money, car dealerships, nightclubs, real estate. He became exactly what Matty had suggested, someone who understood the long game. And by 1975, Nicky Barnes wasn't just another dealer working on consignment, he was a partner. When Matty Madonna got arrested in 1976, Nicky was already established enough to find new suppliers. When Frank Lucas cooperated with the feds, Nicky was insulated enough to avoid the fallout. By 1977, when he appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine as Mr. Untouchable, Nicky Barnes had become exactly what he'd set out to be, untouchable. But here's the part of the story that people don't talk about. That night in February 1973, when Nicky handed over $2 million, he also handed over something more valuable, his ego. Most dealers in his position would have fought, would have refused, would have gotten themselves killed trying to prove they weren't anyone's servant. Nicky did something smarter. He accepted reality. He accepted his position. He accepted the lesson. And then he used that lesson to change everything. March 1977, 4 years after the $2 million night. Nicky Barnes stood in front of the New York Times Magazine cover featuring his own face. Mr. Untouchable. That's what they called him. The man who couldn't be caught. The man who operated with impunity. The man who'd built an empire that even the federal government couldn't crack. But Nicky looked at that cover and thought about Matty Madonna. Because without that night in 1973, without that $2 million lesson, Nicky never would have developed the discipline and patience that made him untouchable. He would have stayed reckless, stayed visible, stayed vulnerable. And he would have ended up dead or in prison long before 1977. The irony, of course, is that the cover that made Nicky famous also destroyed him. President Jimmy Carter saw that cover, saw a black drug dealer flaunting his wealth and power, and Carter personally ordered the Justice Department to bring Nicky Barnes down. By March 1978, Nicky was convicted. Life sentence. By 1982, betrayed by Guy Fisher, the same Guy Fisher who'd questioned giving up the $2 million, Nicky became a federal informant. The council collapsed. Dozens were arrested. The empire was gone. But Nicky survived. He went into witness protection, started a new life, lived another 34 years before dying of cancer in 2012. And in all those years, in all those interviews and documentaries and conversations, Nicky always came back to the same lesson. The night he lost $2 million was the night he learned how to win. Because winning in this business isn't about being the toughest or the boldest or the most ambitious. It's about being smart enough to know when to fight and when to fold. It's about understanding that power doesn't come from what you take. It comes from what you're willing to give up to stay in the game. Matty Madonna taught Nicky that lesson with $2 million. And Nicky Barnes used that lesson to build a 4-year empire. The money was gone, but the knowledge lasted forever.
So what's the real story here? Is it about Nicky Barnes losing $2 million? Or is it about Nicky Barnes paying $2 million for an education that would make him millions more? The truth is, it's both. Because in this life, whether you're in the drug game or any other game, there's always someone above you. Always someone with more power, more connections, more control. And you have two choices: fight them and lose everything, or learn from them and build something that lasts. Nicky Barnes chose to learn, and for 4 years, that choice made him the most powerful drug dealer Harlem had ever seen. But here's what most people don't know about that night in 1973. The $2 million Nicky gave to Matty Madonna, that wasn't the end of their story. Because 3 years later, when Matty got arrested and needed someone to take over his Harlem operations, he called Nicky. And he offered him exactly what Nicky had been waiting for: a direct connection to the Asian suppliers. No more middlemen, no more consignment, full partnership. The $2 million wasn't taken, it was invested. And Nicky Barnes collected his return 1,000 times over. If you want to know what happened after Matty's arrest, how Nicky took over the Harlem drug trade completely, and the one decision that finally brought him down, subscribe now. Because next week, we're diving into the story of Guy Fisher's betrayal, the affair that destroyed the council, and the moment Nicky Barnes decided to become a federal informant. Drop a comment. Would you have given up the $2 million? Or would you have fought Matty Madonna and risked everything? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because the story of Nicky Barnes is just getting started. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.